Today I'm going to do a review of Season 3 of Stranger Things. I'm Jonathan Hetterly, the host of Psych Cinema and a co-host of the Shrink Tank podcast. I'm going to explain why I found Season 3 of Stranger Things to be frustrating. Now, there was a lot of things I liked about the season, but there are a number of things I found very off-putting, and I'm starting to wonder where the Duffer brothers can take this narrative of all of these kids and their families in Hawkins, Indiana, to see where there can be a very satisfying resolution to this story. So just to give you a little backstory, I thoroughly enjoyed Season 1 of Stranger Things. It really caught me off guard. It became a pop culture sensation overnight, and it really hit a lot of those nostalgic buttons of a child that spent half of his childhood growing up in the 80s. And so there was a lot of familiarity, a lot of callbacks that I was very familiar with. And overall, the kids kind of finding themselves in a situation that they were in over their heads, I found very enjoyable. I didn't think it was a particularly smart or deep series, but Season 1 was very satisfying. Now, Season 2 was kind of up and down in a lot of ways, just some of those normal growing pains. I think the Duffer brothers trying to continue to build off of that. They added some new characters that I found very appealing, like Max. But in other things, like Max's brother Billy in the second season, or Mike's mother, kind of like that subplot about her in some ways being an unsatisfied mother and wife, I've kind of found unnecessary and tedious, and it kind of drew a lot of attention away. But overall, Season 2 left me wanting more, so I was eagerly anticipating Season 3, and I really loved early on some of the information that was coming out about how a lot of it was going to be set up in the mall, that Steve was going to be working at the mall, some of the new characters, it seemed like they were going to be going in the right direction, and maybe some of that anticipation led to some of those periods of frustration. I kind of found Season 3 to be up and down, and not just sort of like meh, some of those aspects that I found underwhelming. It actually really frustrated me. And I think one of the biggest challenges Stranger Things is finding themselves is a lot of TV shows that have been successful as an ensemble cast, is that they keep adding new characters, and at some point it's going to shortchange the character development of certain people on the show. And so they brought in some new characters this season, like Robin, Steve's cohort at the mall, and Erica. They gave her a more prominent role, Lucas's younger sister. And I thought both of them were fantastic. They really hit the notes, and I think it helps because they're new characters. What they're doing is they're revealing things about their nature and their temperament and their personalities and their inner dynamics with the rest of the cast. And so I found them to be very refreshing and delightful and really charming. There's a lot of chemistry that Erica showed with Dustin. There was a lot of chemistry that Robin showed with Steve. So those were some of the highlights in terms of this season. Now, some of the frustrating things was really some of the returning cast members and how I felt there wasn't an awful lot of growth in their development. When we think about Mike and Eleven, it really felt like they had to create this fabricated conflict between them since they were so googly over one another in that young puppy love. And I felt the conflict of like lying to not spend a lot of time with each other. I just kind of felt that was really thin. I also felt that Lucas really didn't have a lot to do this season, and I've always kind of found him to be kind of an unlikable character, which then again, it kind of muted some of that charm that Max provided in Season 2, now that they're together. And so she really pivots towards spending more time with Eleven, and she really builds up Eleven's own agency, and for her to kind of come into her own apart from Mike in that relationship. And so that I found refreshing, but there really wasn't that much to it. Then let's talk about Hopper and Joyce, because I found that dynamic to be very frustrating and off-putting. I think Hopper was given done an injustice this season with his story arc, because it's not even a year since Joyce lost Bob, and all of a sudden Hopper is making all of these moves, and he appears to not be doing well in his life. He's kind of letting himself go. Clearly, Eleven and Mike's budding relationship is really getting to him, and he really doesn't seem to have an understanding of how to parent that. But his overreactions, his anger, his temper, I really found that to be drastically different than Season 1 arc, where he was really kind of still in the throes of grief and loss from his own daughter's death. And then in season 2, really you saw that tenderness come out as he started to parent and raise Eleven. So this season, really that explosiveness and that pettiness and that jealousy, I don't know if they were trying to create sexual tension between him and Joyce, but it just didn't work for me. It also didn't work for me because Joyce, the Winona Ryder character, has been constantly pigeonholed as this sort of like whiny or paranoid mother. And at this point, why would anyone be questioning her instincts? That she has shown that she knows what she's doing. Her instincts tend to be true when she feels like there's something off or wrong. And yet, continuously, people seem to just kind of dismiss her, especially Hopper, who at this point should have a stronger relationship with her. So I found a lot of the relationship dynamics, especially the ones that either had romantic or sexual undertones, to be kind of underwhelming and frustrating in a lot of ways. But I think the biggest strikeout of this season has to be Nancy and Jonathan. The storyline just doesn't know what to do with them anymore. And I think when it was sort of a love triangle with Steve, there was a lot of tension, and I felt like that added some dynamics to Nancy and to Jonathan. But at this point, as a separate kind of duo, it's really lacking, I think, both in terms of the storyline, but maybe even just the acting themselves. And so if they had not been a part of this season, if they had just kind of gone off to college or something, I don't think the story would have suffered. In fact, I think it probably would have strengthened because it would have allowed more time for these other characters to be fleshed out. So those are a lot of the frustrating things in terms of the relationship dynamics that I found. But I think they've gotten to a point where the Duffer Brothers and Stranger Things is really just more focused on referencing pop culture products from the 80s than really developing a cohesive storyline. You know, they're pulling from Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. They're pulling from Fast Times at Richmond High. They're pulling from The Thing, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all of these products, but in a lot of ways, by just sort of taking the exterior shell, they're missing out on some of the deeper subtext of the references that they're making. Because quite honestly, the story was pretty thin and not very creative. Russians infiltrating America, that they might also be contributing to just the monsters. I didn't find that particularly interesting in that regard. And so the show has really kind of floated by through charm. And again, some of those frustrating relationship dynamics and character dynamics kind of took away from the overall enjoyment of that. But having said that, I really think that the mall component of the show was really charming, exciting, funny, and the chemistry between Steve and Robin and Dustin and Erica, I think that quartet really carried the show for season 3. And then the last half of the 8th episode, we finally get a lot of heart in the show. And I think that's what was missing from most of this season. And when you got it at the end, you realized, well, what made Stranger Things so special in that first season is that you generally liked and generally cared about all these characters. And for the first time in this series, I found myself not caring as much about what might happen to some of these characters in season 3. But I'm interested to hear what you guys thought, because maybe I'm in the minority here. Maybe Stranger Things season 3 is just a home run and everybody is just enjoying and soaking up the charm and all of the pop culture references. Maybe some of you found the story more inspiring rather than sort of thin. But tell me what you thought of Stranger Things Season 3, and be sure to tune in later on when I also do a deep dive of some of the characters in my Psych Cinema video series. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'm Jonathan Hetterly, and we'll see you at the movies.